Since we're talking about Boyhood, I would like to thank my parents for taking this photo of me when I was a baby. I don't know what happened to my coolness, how come I was only cool when I was a baby, but thanks, parents. Boyhood is written and directed by Richard Linklater and stars Eller Coltrane, Ethan Hawke, Patricia Arquette, and Lorelai Linklater, Richard Linklater's daughter. Boyhood is very simply the story of Mason Jr., played by Eller Coltrane, who starts this movie at 6 years old, and we see him at the end of the movie, 18 years old, heading off to college. And this movie just follows him, his life, his experiences, his relationships with his family and his friends as they all grow up over a span of 12 years. Now, first of all, I just want to say that I was extremely surprised that we even got this movie. I mean, because the Philippines doesn't really get a lot of these smaller indie type hits or whatever, but I was extremely excited that we were actually getting it. I guess the hype behind it was just too much. And if you've ever heard of Boyhood, it's probably because you've heard about how it was made. Yes, this movie was shot over a period of 12 years with the exact same cast. Richard Linklater, back in 2002, cast this 6-year-old boy. He took a gamble on Eller Coltrane and stuck with him over the course of 12 years to make this movie. Now, first, I just want to say that Boyhood is not a movie for everybody. I know a lot of people who don't really like it that much, and that's completely acceptable. It's not like one of those consummately entertaining pieces of cinema or whatever. I wouldn't blame you if you think the movie's boring. I wouldn't blame you if you think it's overhyped or anything, but I really think it has the potential to be something really special. I mean, you talk about more than the sum of its parts, and I think Boyhood personally is like the epitome of more than the sum of its parts, because let me tell you what the parts are. Flawless writing, excellent performances from every single actor, and consistently amazing direction from Richard Linklater. And when you put all those things together, it just transcends and becomes one of the greatest movies I personally have ever seen in my life. Thing is though, when I talk about Boyhood now, like it's hard to describe. Again, because it's more than the sum of its parts, and what I'm essentially gonna be doing for this review is enumerating the parts. So, anything I will say here will really not capture the experience of watching this movie. Bottom line, watch this movie. Even if you don't like it, at least you watched it and you have an opinion about it. You won't bash it without, having watched it. Anyway, first of all, I really want to talk about how this movie looks, because going into this movie, I was thinking, is the video quality gonna change as the technology throughout the years gets better? And Richard Linklater stated that he really intentionally wanted to keep filming it at 35 millimeter. And the cinematography does get cleaner and like wider, I think, as the years pass. And it's not to say that the early years like look bad or anything. I think they actually look kind of charming because they have this grainy like homemade videotape feel to it. It actually feels like that for the first few minutes, that it feels like just a bunch of homemade videos strung together. But then this is the kind of movie that you really adjust to it as it goes on. You learn how to watch this movie as you watch this movie, and you really get used to the pacing. One cool thing that this movie does with its visuals is that there's very subtle like changes in the production design over the years also that kind of serve as signposts and like little peeks into how the characters are doing. You can tell what year it is from like the posters on their walls, or just like what their houses look like and whatnot. You know that they're kind of progressing through life if they have like nicer things. And I really like that. Instead of Richard Linklater putting up a sign that said like 1 year later or 2003, he really just let the visuals and the characters speak for themselves. I also really like how these characters don't stay in the same place like throughout the 12 years. This is a family that really moves around. Richard Linklater didn't go like the easy route and just chose to film on like the same places, the same locations with the same props and whatever. They really kind of challenged themselves and made this family move around, and it really feels like you're on this journey with them, because as time passes, their place in the world like also progresses. Another simple decision that they decided on in this movie that I think really paid off was just they didn't use a lot of makeup. Eller Coltrane has lots of acne as he grows up. Patricia Arquette like looks really really old, and I like how they didn't try to cover any of that up, because it's such a simple thing that a lot of people won't notice, but it really helps with the immersion. You don't see these actors anymore after a while. One of my favorite things about Boyhood, though, is its soundtrack. The soundtrack in this movie is fantastic. Every single song also serves as like a signpost. They only play songs during the year they were released, and every single song is just handpicked to perfection to really fit the tone of this movie, this very wistful tone, but at the same time, it's not like sad or anything. It does have this kind of underlying joy to it, this playfulness, and a lot of these songs really have that. I mean, from the very first frame of this movie, you start hearing Coldplay's Yellow, and in any other movie, that would be such a big roll your eyes moment. But I don't know, just the way they used it in this movie, and like when you look back at it after having watched the whole movie, it just feels very right. And of course, if you watch the trailer and you've heard Hero by Family of the Year, that's like a new anthem, at least for everyone who's watched this. I mean, whenever I hear it again, like I just get transported back to this movie. And seriously, major props to putting Crank That by Soulja Boy into a movie and making it sound like okay and nostalgic actually. Some of the characters sing throughout the movie also, and it's super unglamorous and I love it, it's cute. One of the other things that I really love about this movie, well, I love everything, but one of the specific things I love about this movie is how when this movie transitions from year to year, the transitions are absolutely seamless. Again, there's no signposts or anything. There's no like dramatic shift where it's going to accelerate a year forward. It really just kind of switches scene and suddenly they're slightly older. It gives you that sensation of seeing someone for the first time in a long time. It's just like it's such a joy when you're watching it and you're like, oh, he's kind of older. And then it's so gradual, but like the changes are very noticeable also. And why this is important in this movie is it never makes any moment feel like a milestone. For me, that's the biggest thing about this movie. This movie is not about milestones in life. In fact, this movie is all about the little moments that surround these milestones that are actually just as important and like really, really precious also. And if this movie ended with like a big moment and then had a big transition leading to the next year, those book-ended moments would have felt much more important. But this movie really makes the decision to make every single moment feel like really inconsequential and really ordinary, but at the same time there is that preciousness about them. It becomes clear as you watch the movie that every single moment has been selected intentionally because specifically for this reason, that it does not show a milestone, just shows a normal conversation with someone else, but it actually like really helps with the characters and stuff. And you only really feel the effect of this at the end of the movie. Like I remember after watching this movie, I was just talking to my friend going home, and we started recalling all these different tiny moments throughout the movie, and I just realized like how many amazingly universal moments were in this movie, but I didn't notice them while watching them because it was just they weren't heroized at all. These moments weren't like self-important or whatever. They were just there, and I loved it. Also, this movie is 2 hours 45 minutes long, and it's never boring, at least to me. There's no real danger in the movie, but you really do care about the characters, and it's just so fun to like connect with the movie. And I forgot to mention that that's probably like the make it or break it thing if you will like or dislike this movie. It really depends on how much you'll be able to connect with it. And in terms of like the story's plot, it doesn't really have a plot because nothing really happens throughout the movie. It really is just like individual moments coalescing into a whole, and that's extremely satisfying. In fact, I would say that this movie is like an interactive film in that it really kind of asks you to actively connect with it. I realize that that may sound difficult if you're not American or if you're not even like a boy, but these experiences that Mason goes through are so specific, but at the same time they have this like tiny grain of universality within each of them, so that even if you didn't go through exactly the same thing, just the action itself that they're doing or the stage of life they're in, you can extremely relate to it. I also love how each of the characters in this movie all really develop in both expected and unexpected ways. So in a way, you kind of feel like you do know and don't know the characters at the same time. And while some may argue that there are a couple of characters in this movie that are just like pure evil or whatever, I personally don't see them as that way at all. All these characters are very real in the sense that I really can't just point to them and say, you're a good guy, you're a bad guy, or whatever. They all have their mistakes and their faults. And of course, this is Richard Linklater who wrote the Before trilogy, so of course the dialogue is going to be fantastic while staying like really normal. And the dialogue is just loaded with these little nuggets of wisdom and truth that, like I said, aren't heroized in any way. They don't focus on like a money line or anything. Like it's just like these normal conversations that really have wisdom in them. And then again, when you look back at the movie, you realize, oh, what he said was like really poignant. In terms of acting, while Elder Coltrane isn't like Daniel Day-Lewis or whatever, I still think he did a fantastic job in this movie because he plays Mason as something of a blank slate. I mean, he still has a lot of personality in him, but I think it was a really smart decision to play Mason as like kind of a quiet kid because it becomes so much easier for more people to project onto him and to connect with him. Because imagine if Mason were like the high school, popular kid, or just like this really outgoing guy. I like to think that there are much less outgoing people out there than there are like people with their quiet, sensitive side. This also helps keep Mason's future uncertain. Like if Mason were like a really cheerful person or whatever, it might be easier for some people to kind of predict where he's going in life. But the fact that Mason really just doesn't really know what he wants to do yet just opens so many doors, so many possibilities for him. Ethan Hawke, as always, is extremely likable and charismatic, but at the same time, he really conveys this sense of like his character has a long history, especially with Patricia Arquette's mother character. Patricia Arquette avoids every single mother stereotype like I was expecting her to fall into, and she's truly heartbreaking. Like the scenes she's in, she really just feels like she's trying so hard to just do well for her children, and you really feel that in her. And every single like tiny achievement she makes, you feel so good for her, but at the same time when she breaks down, you feel terrible for her. Lorelai Linklater is also extremely charming and likable. There was a moment like near the end of the movie where I leaned over to my friend and we both said to each other like she got kind of hot, but it was weird because 2 hours earlier we saw her when she was 6 years old. So it's really interesting. It's a really funny kind of experience you have with the movie. And like I said, the director Richard Linklater, because he directed the Before trilogy, he is like the master of directing like a normal conversation and making it extremely engaging and involving for the audience. And the tone he keeps throughout this movie is so consistent. Again, it's that wistful tone supported by like the choices of visuals and music. Him keeping this tone throughout the movie really allows every single person to have their own like individual interpretation of the movie, or at least like different insights that they might get from different scenes. But this isn't to say that the movie like is kind of a cop out and just lets you interpret on your own. This movie obviously has like its own grand theme running through it, and that's life. This movie is about life, and it's life is what you make it. It's also interesting how Richard Linklater's directorial style just really stayed consistent throughout the entire movie, and he resisted the urge really to become lazy or to experiment a bit too much. He knew that he had to stay consistent throughout this movie, and this movie really feels like one unbroken whole. Boyhood to me is an absolute masterpiece. I never say that like ever. Like this is like I think the first time I've said it this year. You will definitely like it if you like the Before trilogy, in my opinion. If you don't really like those movies, you might not like Boyhood, but watch it anyway. Have an opinion about it before talking about it. Again, it's not a movie for everyone. Absolutely not. It's totally okay if you hate it or whatever. Like it's fine. I can understand if you're bored out of your skull in like the first 10 minutes. But I really think it has the potential to be legitimately life-changing, because in the couple of weeks after I watched this movie, I just felt so different. Like it didn't change my life in the sense that it solved any of my problems or gave me like a whole new perspective on who I was or whatever. But I really just started appreciating like the smaller moments more, and it's really a beautiful thing, I think. Alright, so that's my review of Boyhood. Have you guys seen it? What do you think about it? Did you love it? Did you hate it? Whatever you thought, whether you agree with it or not, please leave me a comment. Let's have a conversation.